My name is Madeline, and I'm a 32-year-old elementary school art teacher. Every Christmas dinner with my achievement-oriented family feels like walking into a minefield of judgment and comparison. This year, as we sat around the perfectly decorated table, my mother's words cut through the festive atmosphere like a knife. "You're our most useless child," she said with a dismissive laugh, not realizing how deeply those words pierced my heart. After years of feeling inadequate next to my brilliant siblings, something inside me finally snapped. If you're watching this from a place where family expectations have weighed you down, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Let me share how I finally found my voice this Christmas. In my hometown of Oak Ridge, Connecticut, the Preston family name carries weight. We're known as the family that excels at everything: academics, careers, social standing, you name it. My father, Richard Preston, is a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital. With his salt and pepper hair and commanding presence, he's saved countless lives and pioneered surgical techniques that medical students now study. His office walls are lined with awards, diplomas, and photos of him shaking hands with notable figures in medicine. My mother, Evelyn, is equally impressive. A former corporate attorney who graduated top of her class from Columbia Law, she left her high-powered career 10 years ago to manage the Preston Family Foundation. She orchestrates charity galas, sits on multiple boards, and somehow still manages to maintain our family's social calendar with military precision. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair never has a strand out of place, much like her meticulously organized life. Then there are my siblings, the trio of Preston success stories. My older brother Alexander is 38 and works as an investment banker in New York. With his MBA from Harvard, he manages portfolios worth billions and flies first class to meetings around the world. His Christmas updates always include numbers with an impressive array of zeros. He married Sophia, a pediatric oncologist, and they have two perfectly behaved children who already speak 3 languages at ages 7 and 5. My older sister Natalie is 36 and has made a name for herself as a neuroscientist. She holds multiple patents for her research on degenerative brain diseases and splits her time between her lab at Johns Hopkins and giving lectures internationally. Tall, slender, and effortlessly elegant Natalie has always been our mother's favorite, though no one admits this openly. Her intelligence is matched only by her poise. My younger brother Thomas, 29, is the family's golden boy. The tech entrepreneur sold his first startup for millions before he turned 25 and has been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. Despite his success, Thomas is the only one who's ever shown genuine interest in my life and work. He remembers the names of my students and asks about my art projects when no one else does. And then there's me, Madeline Preston, 32, elementary school art teacher. In a family of prestigious degrees and 7-figure incomes, my career choice has always been viewed as underwhelming at best. Such a shame. I've overheard my mother tell her friends she was so bright, but she just never applied herself. The truth is, I love what I do. Helping children discover their creativity and watching their faces light up when they create something meaningful brings me joy that no salary figure could match. But in the Preston family, joy has never been an acceptable metric for success. Our Christmas dinners have always followed the same script. We gather at my parents' Georgian-style mansion, which sits on 3 manicured acres and looks like it belongs in a holiday movie. After drinks and appetizers, we move to the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier and antique mahogany table. Then comes the tradition I've grown to dread: the achievement updates. One by one, each child shares their accomplishments from the past year. Alexander talks about deals closed and bonuses earned. Natalie discusses research breakthroughs and academic honors. Thomas details his latest ventures and investments. And when it's my turn, whatever I share is met with polite smiles that don't reach their eyes, followed by a quick pivot to more substantial matters. Growing up in this environment shaped me in ways I'm still uncovering. As a child, my artistic talents were dismissed as cute hobbies rather than genuine skills worth developing. When I won a regional art competition in high school, my mother's response was, "Imagine what you could achieve if you put that effort into science or business." I tried, believe me. I started college as a pre-med student, hoping to finally make my parents proud. I spent sleepless nights memorizing anatomical terms and chemical formulas, pushing aside my sketchbooks and paints. But halfway through sophomore year, I had a panic attack during an organic chemistry exam and realized I was living someone else's dream. When I switched my major to art education, my father didn't speak to me for a month. My apartment reflects the life I've chosen, small but filled with light art and color. It's in a modest neighborhood that makes my mother lock her car doors when she visits, which is rarely. My walls display both my own work and pieces from my students. It's nothing like the Preston Mansion with its museum-quality art selected by a professional decorator, but it's authentically mine. My relationships with my siblings have been shaped by our family dynamic. Alexander and I exchange birthday cards and occasional texts, but he's always been distant, too busy with his important life to connect with his underachieving sister. Natalie and I were close as children, but grew apart as her accomplishments multiplied, and the comparison became too painful to ignore. Only Thomas has maintained a genuine relationship with me, calling regularly and visiting my classroom whenever he's in town. This Christmas would mark the first time in years that I planned to share something I was truly proud of. My artwork had been selected for a local gallery exhibition, a small achievement by Preston standards, but significant in my world. Little did I know that this Christmas dinner would become a turning point for our entire family. The annual Preston family Christmas gathering always cast a long shadow over my December. This year, the dread began creeping in right after Thanksgiving, when my mother sent her usual text, "Christmas dinner at 6 p.m. sharp. Business formal attire, please confirm." No warm wishes, no hope you can make it, just an expectation of attendance. I spent weeks agonizing over gifts. What do you buy for people who can afford anything they want? My teacher's salary stretches only so far, but showing up with modest presents would just reinforce my status as the family disappointment. I finally settled on hand-painted ornaments for everyone, personal and meaningful, but certain to be met with that particular smile my mother reserves for quaint gestures. 3 weeks before Christmas, I met my best friend Sarah for coffee. We've been friends since college when she found me crying in the bathroom after I called home to tell my parents I was changing my major. "Why don't you just skip it this year?" Sarah suggested, stirring her latte. "Tell them you've got the flu. Or better yet, tell them you've been invited to spend Christmas with a friend's family who actually enjoys your company." I sighed, watching the steam rise from my cup. "You don't understand. In my family, attendance isn't optional. It's a performance review disguised as a holiday." "That's messed up, Maddie." "It's tradition," I said, though the word felt hollow. "Besides, I actually have something to share this year. My art got selected for the winter showcase at the Westville Gallery." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's amazing. When's the opening?" "January 15th. It's not MoMA or anything, but it's a real gallery with real artists." "Are you kidding? It's a huge deal. Your family has to be impressed by that." I gave her a look that said everything. "Well, they should be," she insisted. The memory of last year's Christmas dinner flashed through my mind. I had shared that one of my students had won a statewide art contest under my guidance. Before I could finish the story, my mother had interrupted to ask Alexander about his recent trip to Tokyo. "My achievements don't register on the Preston scale," I told Sarah. "But this year feels different. I want them to see that my path has value too." A week before Christmas, my sister Natalie called. These check-in calls always followed the same pattern. A brief inquiry about my life, followed by a detailed account of her latest accomplishments. "So how are the finger paintings coming along?" she asked, after telling me about her upcoming TED Talk. "They're not finger paintings, Nat. We're working on a mixed media project exploring identity and community." "That sounds creative," she said with that familiar Preston condescension. "Are you bringing anyone to Christmas this year?" Mom was asking. And there it was, the relationship question. My recent breakup with Jason, another teacher at my school, was still fresh. We'd dated for 8 months before realizing we wanted different things. He was looking for marriage and children right away, while I was still finding my footing as an artist and teacher. "No, just me this year," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, well, I'm bringing Dr. Martin Chen. He's the neurologist I've been collaborating with on the Alzheimer's research. He's just been awarded the Breakthrough Prize." Mom's thrilled. Of course she was. The outfit selection for Christmas dinner became another source of anxiety. Too fashionable would prompt comments about how I could afford designer clothes on a teacher's salary. Too casual would spark lectures about appropriate attire. I finally chose a dark green dress that I'd worn twice before hoping it would fly under the radar. As the day approached, I found myself standing before the mirror each morning practicing what I would say when it came time for my achievement update. I'm excited to share that my artwork has been selected for exhibition at the Westville Gallery's Winter Showcase. I rehearsed different tones, casual, professional, matter of fact, trying to find one that wouldn't invite dismissal. The morning of Christmas Eve, I tried to center myself with the meditation techniques my therapist had recommended. Your worth is not determined by their approval, I repeated as I drove the familiar route to my childhood home. The Preston mansion looked like something from a holiday card. White lights outlining the roof and windows, a professional wreath on the door, and a glimpse of the massive tree through the front windows. I arrived early as I always did, hoping to earn points by helping with last-minute preparations. My mother greeted me at the door with an air kiss that didn't quite reach my cheek. Madeline, good you're here. You can arrange the cheese platter while I finish dressing. The caterers have already laid everything out in the kitchen. Just make it look nice. She paused, glancing at my dress. Didn't you wear that last year? And so it began. The Preston family Christmas dinner had all the warmth of a corporate board meeting with better food. The mansion's 20-foot ceilings echoed with classical music played through hidden speakers, and the air smelled of pine cinnamon and my mother's expensive perfume. The massive Christmas tree in the great room didn't have a single homemade ornament, just color-coordinated glass baubles and tiny white lights arranged by a professional decorator who came each year. I was arranging crackers around an imported cheese board when Alexander arrived with his perfect family in tow. His wife Sophia looked runway ready in a red designer dress, and their children, Emma and Ethan, wore matching holiday outfits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Maddie, Alexander gave me a brisk one-armed hug. How's the teaching thing going? Still at that public school? Lincoln Elementary. Yes, still there, still loving it. I answered, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. Good for you, he said in a tone that suggested it wasn't really good at all. Some people need to do those jobs right. Sophia offered a sympathetic smile that made me want to disappear into the imported cheese. The children barely acknowledged me, too busy showing their grandfather the French phrases they'd learned that week. Natalie arrived next with Dr. Martin Chen, her research colleague, who, based on my mother's reaction, might as well have been royalty. My mother practically glided across the room to greet them, gushing about his recent feature in Scientific American. And Natalie, darling, that blazer is exquisite. Is it the Burberry I sent you? Yes, Mom. Perfect for the conference in London next month. I stood by the fireplace, invisible as always, until Thomas burst through the door like a gust of fresh air. Maddie, unlike our brother's perfunctory greeting, Thomas wrapped me in a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. I've missed your face. How are the tiny artists? Did Miguel finish his clay monster? The fact that Thomas remembered details about my students when no one else bothered to ask my classroom grade level warmed my heart. He did, and it's gloriously terrifying. I have pictures. Show me everything, he insisted, guiding me to a quiet corner, while the rest of the family continued their performance of holiday perfection. I scrolled through photos of my students' work, and Thomas asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested. He was the only Preston who'd ever visited my classroom bringing pizza for my students and sitting cross-legged on the floor while they showed him their projects. I almost forgot, he said, lowering his voice. I heard about your exhibition. That's huge, Maddie. I'm so proud of you. How did you know about that? I follow the Westville Gallery on Instagram. Saw your name in their announcement post. He squeezed my shoulder. I'm coming to the opening. Wouldn't miss it. Before I could thank him, my mother's voice cut through our conversation. Drinks are served in the living room. Thomas, the Blakely's son, is here. You remember Jacob from Yale? He's just launched a very promising tech venture. You should talk to him. Just like that, Thomas was redirected to someone more valuable, and I was left alone until my father spotted me. Madeline, he said with a nod, already checking his phone for emails. The Preston family joke was that my father performed heart surgery with less concentration than he gave his inbox. Good to see you. How is everything at your workplace? It's good, Dad. We just finished a community mural project that's getting some local attention. That's nice, he said absently. his eyes still on his screen. Very nice. Dinner was served precisely at 6. The formal dining room gleamed with candlelight reflecting off the sterling silver and fine china. Name cards directed us to our assigned seats. Mine predictably at the far end of the table from my parents, between my 7-year-old niece and my mother's friend's husband, who was hard of hearing. The catered meal progressed through courses of butternut squash soup, roasted beet salad, and perfectly cooked prime rib. Wine flowed freely, and I found myself refilling my glass more often than usual liquid courage for the achievement toast that would inevitably follow dessert. Sure enough, as the servers cleared away our plates, my father stood and raised his glass. Another year of Preston accomplishments. Let's go around the table and share our successes, shall we? Alexander, would you start us off? Alexander straightened his already perfect posture. Well, the Singapore acquisition finally went through. $3 billion deal, largest in the firm's history. He paused for the appreciative murmurs. And I've been made Senior Managing Director effective January 1st. Comes with a 7-figure signing bonus and equity options. My mother beamed. Remarkable, Alexander. Simply remarkable. Natalie. My father turned to his favorite. Natalie smiled modestly. Our research team had a breakthrough with the neural pathway mapping. The paper's being published in Nature next month. She gestured to Dr. Chen beside her. Martin and I have been invited to present at the World Neuroscience Congress, and there's talk of a potential Nobel nomination in the next few years. Gasps and congratulations rippled around the table. My father looked like he might burst with pride. And I've been asked to give a TED Talk in February, she added, as if global recognition for potentially curing Alzheimer's wasn't quite enough. Thomas. My father continued working his way down the achievement food chain. Pretty good year, Thomas said with his characteristic casual charm. Secured Series B funding for the new startup, $50 million. Valuations at about $300 million now, and we're expanding to Asia next quarter. My mother clapped her hands together. Wonderful news. The Preston legacy continues to grow. Then all eyes turned to me, the moment I'd been preparing for and dreading in equal measure. Madeline. My father prompted, his tone already carrying a note of resignation. I took a deep breath and sat up straighter. I'm actually excited to share that my artwork has been selected for exhibition at the Westville Gallery's Winter Showcase. It's a juried exhibition with artists from across the state, and only 15 were chosen. The opening is next month. A brief silence followed. I could see Thomas giving me an encouraging smile, but everyone else seemed to be processing this information with visible confusion, as if I'd announced I was taking up professional juggling. Well, my mother said finally, that's nice, dear. But now for the real achievements we were discussing, contributions to the family foundation for the coming year. Alexander has pledged $100,000, and Natalie's research grant includes a 15% charitable allocation. Thomas is donating stock options. She didn't even bother to ask what I might contribute. Instead, she looked around the table and said with a laugh that didn't quite disguise the cruelty beneath, well, I suppose every family needs one child who reminds the others to be grateful. You're our most useless child, Madeline, but we love you anyway. The table fell silent. Alexander suddenly became very interested in his water glass. Natalie had the decency to look uncomfortable. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. Thomas's face darkened with anger. And something inside me, something that had been bending for 32 years, finally broke. The words "most useless child" hung in the air like poisonous gas. I felt heat rising from my chest to my face, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The crystal chandelier light seemed to intensify, casting everyone in harsh relief. Time slowed down, and I became acutely aware of every sensation. The weight of the sterling silver fork in my hand, the scratch of the linen napkin against my skin, the tight knot forming in my throat. Under the table, Thomas reached over and squeezed my hand. His touch anchored me to reality, preventing me from floating away into the familiar fog of shame and hurt that had been my refuge at so many family gatherings. But this time, instead of retreating, I found myself speaking. What exactly do you mean by that, Mom? My voice came out calmer than I expected, almost curious. My mother blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by my direct question. She was used to me absorbing her barbs in silence. It was just a little joke, Madeline. Don't be so sensitive, she said, waving her hand dismissively. We value your creative pursuits." The condescension in her voice was the final push I needed. 32 years of suppressed feelings rose to the surface, not in a chaotic explosion, but in a clear, steady stream of truth. "No, it wasn't a joke," I said, setting down my fork deliberately. "Jokes are meant to be funny. That was meant to diminish me, as you've been doing for as long as I can remember." The table went completely still. Even Emma and Ethan, usually absorbed in their tablets, looked up at the shift in energy. "I'd like to address this idea of useless that you seem to apply exclusively to me," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Is usefulness only measured in dollars earned or prestigious titles accumulated? Because if that's the metric, then yes, I'm the least useful Preston. I don't make millions or save lives or run foundations." My mother's face had gone rigid, her social mask firmly in place. "Madeline, this is hardly the time or place for this discussion." "When would be the right time, Mom?" "When we're not celebrating everyone else's achievements while dismissing mine. When you're not surrounded by an audience for your carefully crafted insults." I turned to look at each family member. "Do you know what I do every day? I teach children to express themselves when they don't have the words. I show them that their unique perspective matters in a world that's constantly telling them to conform. I help them find beauty in themselves and others." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "No one is saying teaching isn't valuable, Madeline. Aren't you?" "Because for 20 years, I've heard nothing but disappointment about my career choice, as if helping a child find their voice is somehow less important than increasing a stock portfolio or publishing in a journal that only other specialists will read." Alexander cleared his throat. "That's not fair, Maddie. We've always supported your choices." I looked at my brother directly. "Have you, Alex? When was the last time you asked me about my work? Not my salary or my benefits, or whether I've considered administration to move up, but the actual work I do? When have any of you—" I gestured around the table, "except Thomas, shown genuine interest in my life?" Natalie's eyes had filled with tears. "I didn't realize you felt this way." "How could you not realize?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering has the same script. You three share your impressive accomplishments, and I'm treated like an afterthought. Mom literally just called me useless to my face at Christmas dinner, and none of you—" I looked pointedly at my father, said a word in my defense. My mother tried to interject, but I held up my hand. For once in my life, I wasn't going to be interrupted. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth to this family, measuring myself against standards that were never mine to begin with. Do you know what that does to a person? To constantly feel like who you are and what you love is fundamentally inadequate." Thomas spoke up. "Maddie's right. We've all been complicit in this, myself included, for not saying something sooner." I gave him a grateful look before continuing. "I want to be clear about something. I love being an art teacher. I love nurturing creativity in children who might otherwise never pick up a paintbrush. I may not make the kind of money you all do, but I'm rich in ways that don't show up on a tax return." My mother had regained her composure and her defensive posture. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Madeline. No one is asking you to be anyone other than who you are." "That's exactly what you've been asking, Mom. Every dismissive comment about my little job, every comparison to Natalie's academic success or the boys' financial achievements, it's all been one long message that who I am isn't enough." I stood up my chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. "I love you all. I do. But I love myself too much to stay here and be treated this way. I'm leaving early this year." "Madeline, don't be ridiculous." My father finally spoke, looking alarmed at this departure from the script. "Sit down. We haven't even had dessert." "I've had my fill," I said, placing my napkin beside my plate. "Merry Christmas." As I walked out of the dining room, back straight and head high, I heard chairs moving behind me. I didn't turn around to see who might be following. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone else's reaction to determine my own. I was listening to myself. The cold December air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, a stark contrast to the heat of emotion burning inside me. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys, the reality of what I'd just done sinking in. I disrupted the carefully maintained facade of Preston family harmony. I'd spoken truths that had been silently festering for decades, and I'd walked out on Christmas dinner, an unprecedented act of rebellion in our family history. I sat in my car in the circular driveway, the engine off, staring at the mansion's perfect exterior. Through the dining room windows, I could see silhouettes moving around the table. Were they continuing with dessert as if nothing had happened? Were they discussing my outburst? Were they relieved I was gone? A tapping on my window startled me. It was Thomas, his breath fogging in the cold air. I unlocked the door and he slid into the passenger seat. That, he said, was the most badass thing I've ever seen. A laugh escaped me, half relief, half lingering tension. I ruined Christmas. No, Mom ruined Christmas when she decided to be cruel for no reason. He turned to face me fully. Maddie, I'm sorry. For what? You're the only one who's ever supported me. For not calling them out sooner. For letting you feel alone in this. He ran a hand through his hair. I knew how they treated you wasn't right, but it was easier to stay quiet, to be grateful I wasn't the target. It's not your job to protect me, I said, though his words soothed a part of me that had felt abandoned. Family is supposed to protect each other, he sighed. Listen, I'm going back in there to get our coats and your purse. Then I'm taking you home. You don't have to leave because of me. I'm not staying for dessert after what Mom said. Besides, he grinned suddenly, you're my ride to your gallery opening next month, remember? After Thomas returned with our things, I drove through the snow-dusted streets of Oak Ridge, past the town green with its canopy of lights, past the elementary school, where I taught past the life I'd built despite my family's disapproval. Want to talk about it? Thomas asked as we turned onto my street. Not yet, I said. I'm still processing. The truth was, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. The Madeline Preston who sat quietly while her mother belittled her was someone I'd left behind in that dining room, who I was now driving away from decades of emotional abuse, was still taking shape. When we reached my apartment building, Thomas hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Maddie. So damn proud. After he left to catch an Uber back to his hotel, I entered my apartment and saw it with fresh eyes. The colorful paintings covering the walls, the handmade pottery from local artists, the comfortable furniture chosen for creativity rather than status. This was a home that reflected who I truly was, not the Preston legacy, but my own. My phone had begun buzzing incessantly. The family group chat was exploding with messages. From Mom. Your behavior tonight was completely inappropriate. You've embarrassed yourself and the family. We need to discuss this when you've calmed down. From Dad. Madeline, call me when you get a chance. Just me. From Alexander. Mom was out of line, but so were you. We respect you, but you need to respect our parents too. From Natalie. I had no idea you felt that way. Can we talk? I'm so sorry. From Thomas. Just checking you got home okay. You're a rock star, love you. I silenced my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, noticing my hands had finally stopped shaking. I sat by my window looking out at the snowy street below and felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it as peace. For the first time in years, I slept soundly on Christmas Eve without anxiety dreams about disappointing my family. I woke to sunlight streaming through my curtains and the realization that I didn't have to return to my parents' house for Christmas Day festivities. The freedom was dizzying. Instead of exchanging more forced pleasantries and carefully wrapped gifts, I spent Christmas morning in my pajamas, drinking coffee and working on a new painting. Around noon, Sarah called to check in. So, how was the Preston Christmas Spectacular? She asked. I told my entire family off and walked out before dessert, I said. Her gasp was audible. Holy shit, Maddie! What happened? As I recounted the previous night's events, I found myself laughing at parts that had seemed devastating just hours before. The distance, however small, was already giving me perspective. What are you going to do now? Sarah asked when I finished. I looked at the half-completed canvas before me, a riot of color and emotion that would never hang on my parents' perfectly coordinated walls. I'm going to finish this painting, I said, and then I'm going to my gallery opening next month with or without their approval. Count me in for the opening, Sarah said, front row cheering embarrassingly loud. That afternoon, I received a text from the gallery director asking if I could drop by to discuss placement of my work. It felt like the universe was providing exactly what I needed, a reminder that there was a whole world outside the Preston bubble, a world where my art and my voice mattered. As I walked through the gallery discussing lighting and wall space with the director, I realized I was smiling. Christmas dinner with my family had always left me drained and diminished. But today, despite the confrontation, or perhaps because of it, I felt energized and expanded. I had finally spoken my truth, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. One moment, I felt liberated, proud of myself for finally standing up to years of subtle and not so subtle put-downs. The next, I was seized by panic, wondering if I'd permanently damaged relationships that, despite their toxicity, were still important to me. My father's request to talk privately lingered in my mind. Of all the responses I'd received, his surprised me the most. My father had always been emotionally distant, more engaged with his surgical practice than his children's lives. That he wanted to speak with me alone, without my mother's mediating presence, was unprecedented. I was still considering whether to call him when he solved the dilemma for me. On the evening of the gallery opening, as I was hanging the last of my pieces, a series of mixed media works exploring family dynamics and silent voices, I heard a familiar throat clearing behind me. Madeline. I turned to find my father standing awkwardly in the center of the gallery, looking out of place in his expensive overcoat among the bohemian art crowd. Dad, what are you doing here? He gestured vaguely at the walls. I wanted to see your exhibition. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. In 32 years, my father had never once attended any of my art shows, not even my college senior showcase. Mom's not with you? I asked, looking around for her imposing figure. No. He shuffled uncomfortably. She doesn't know I'm here. The gallery director approached, sensing tension. We're just about ready for the opening. Would you like a moment with your father? I supplied. Yes, please. When we were alone in the back room, my father studied me with an intensity I'd never seen directed my way before. It was the look he usually reserved for complex surgical cases. Your comments at Christmas dinner? He began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. They've made me do some thinking. I waited, not rushing to fill the silence as I typically would have. I've never understood your art, he continued finally, or why you chose teaching when you could have done more. The familiar sting of disappointment rose, but I pushed it back. By more, you mean something that would impress the country club crowd. He winced. That's not fair. Isn't it? When have you ever asked what my art means to me? When have you ever visited my classroom to see what I actually do with my students? My father looked down at his expensive shoes. You're right, I haven't. The simple admission stunned me into silence. Would you show me now? He asked, gesturing to the gallery. Your work. Would you explain it to me? I hesitated, wary of opening myself to more dismissal. But something in his expression, a vulnerability I'd never associated with my confident surgeon father, made me nod. We walked through the exhibition space, stopping before each of my pieces. I explained my techniques, my inspirations, the emotions I was trying to capture. To my surprise, my father asked thoughtful questions. He didn't pretend to understand everything, but for the first time he was genuinely trying. Before the public opening began, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've been an absent father, Madeline. Not just physically, though God knows I spent too many nights at the hospital, but emotionally. I let your mother set the tone for what success looked like in our family, and I never questioned whether it was the right measure for each of you. Why are you saying this now? I asked, suspicious of this sudden insight. Because when you spoke up at dinner, you weren't just confronting your mother. You were confronting me too. My silence. My complicity. He looked around at the gallery at my art displayed prominently on the walls, and you forced me to see what I've been missing all these years. The gallery began filling with people, art lovers, local teachers, some of my students and their parents. Sarah arrived with a bouquet of sunflowers. Thomas came straight from the airport, still in his business suit. To my surprise, Natalie appeared as well, hanging back uncertainly near the entrance. My father noticed her too. I should go. This is your night, and you don't need family drama distracting from it. Stay, I said impulsively. See what I've built outside of the Preston expectations. He nodded, a small smile forming. I'd like that. The opening was a success beyond my expectations. Several pieces sold, including one to a prominent local collector. My students beamed with pride, seeing their teacher's work in a real gallery. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of my father watching me interact with colleagues, students, and art enthusiasts, seeing me in my element perhaps for the first time. 2 days later, Natalie asked to meet for coffee. We sat in an indie cafe that was worlds away from the upscale establishments she usually frequented. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, stirring her latte absently. About none of us asking about your work. And you're right. I haven't been a good sister. It's not just about asking about my work, Nat. It's about seeing me as a complete person, not just the family disappointment. She flinched at my bluntness. I never thought of you as a disappointment. No, you've never made a finger painting joke, never implied that teaching elementary school was something anyone could do. Natalie had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry. I think part of me has been jealous. Jealous of what? My tiny apartment, my modest salary, my lack of accolades. Of your freedom, she said quietly. Of how sure you are about what you want. Do you know how many nights I lie awake wondering if I chose neuroscience because I love it, or because it's what was expected of me? I stared at her, this perfect sister, who had always seemed to effortlessly embody everything our parents valued. I had no idea. Of course not, we're Prestons. We don't talk about doubts or feelings. She reached across the table to take my hand. But maybe we should start. In the weeks that followed, Alexander remained distant, though he sent a brief text acknowledging that Mom was out of line, when my mother herself oscillated between icy silence and attempts to pretend nothing had happened depending on who else was present. But small changes began to appear. My father called occasionally, asking about my teaching and my art in ways he never had before. Natalie invited me to lunch every few weeks, our conversations gradually becoming more authentic. Thomas, always my ally, became even more vocal in his support, challenging our mother directly when she made dismissive comments about my career. I began therapy to address the years of emotional damage, learning to recognize patterns of people-pleasing and self-doubt that had developed in response to my family's criticism. I found my voice not just with them, but in other areas of my life as well. Speaking up more at faculty meetings, setting boundaries with demanding friends, being more authentic in dating relationships. At school, my principal noticed the change. You've really come into your own this year, Madeline, she told me during my performance review. Your confidence has transformed your teaching. When the next family gathering approached, Easter at my parents' house, I set clear boundaries in advance. I would attend, but I would leave if anyone made disparaging comments about my career or life choices. To my surprise, the dinner passed without incident. There was tension, certainly, and careful navigation of sensitive topics, but no outright disrespect. As spring turned to summer, I launched a community art program for underprivileged children in Oak Ridge. To my astonishment, my father volunteered to help secure funding through his hospital connections. Art therapy has shown remarkable results with pediatric patients, he explained when I questioned his motives. And, he added more hesitantly, I'm proud of what you're creating here. Those words, I'm proud of you, from the man whose approval I'd sought my entire life, meant more than any gallery showing or teaching award ever could. 1 year later, I found myself once again driving to my parents' house for Christmas dinner. So much had changed in 12 months that it felt like navigating an alternate reality. The Preston mansion looked the same from the outside, perfectly decorated, intimidatingly grand. But my relationship to it and to the people inside had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the family disappointment seeking approval. I was Madeline Preston, elementary school art teacher, community program director, and exhibited artist. More importantly, I was someone who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it. The past year had brought unexpected developments for all of us. My father had reduced his surgical practice to part-time, claiming he wanted more balance in his life, a concept the old Richard Preston would have scoffed at. He'd become a regular volunteer at my community art program, initially helping with administration, but gradually taking an interest in the children and their work. My mother had struggled the most with the new family dynamic. After months of resistance, she had finally agreed to attend family therapy sessions. Not because she thought she needed to change, but because, as she put it, someone needs to explain to the therapist how families are supposed to function. Ironically, those sessions had revealed how her own childhood in a high-achieving, emotionally cold household had shaped her parenting style. Progress with her was slow and uneven. Some days she seemed to genuinely try to connect with me as a person, rather than a project to be fixed. Other days, the critical comments slipped out as naturally as breathing. But there was one significant difference. Now, when she made dismissive remarks about my career or choices, someone, often my father or Thomas, called her on it immediately. Natalie and I had developed a closer relationship than we'd had since childhood. Her confession about her own doubts had opened a door to more honest conversations. She'd even started taking a ceramics class, admitting she'd always been curious about art, but had suppressed that interest to focus on serious pursuits. Alexander remained the most distant, though even he had shown small signs of change. He'd started bringing his children to visit my classroom, saying he wanted them to develop their creative thinking. It wasn't a full endorsement of my path, but it was acknowledgement that what I offered had value. Thomas had gone from being my only ally to being my most vocal champion. He'd invested in the community art program, commissioned a piece for his company's headquarters, and consistently redirected family conversations when they veered toward the old hierarchy of achievements. As for me, the changes were both professional and personal. My community art program had received a significant grant from a national foundation. My own artwork had been featured in a regional exhibition that traveled to 3 cities. I'd started dating Michael, an environmental lawyer who valued my creativity and passion for teaching in ways no previous partner had. But the most significant change was internal. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices or apologize for my existence. I had found a confidence that came not from external validation, but from living authentically. This Christmas dinner would be different in another way as well. My mother surprisingly had agreed to my suggestion that we replace the achievement updates with something more meaningful, each person sharing what they were grateful for and what they hoped for in the coming year. As we gathered around the table, the same formal dining room with its crystal and silver, I could feel the shift in energy. There was still tension, still careful navigation of potential landmines, but there was also more genuine connection than I could remember at any previous family gathering. When it came time for our new tradition, my father started. I'm grateful for the chance to know my children as adults, not just extensions of my own ambitions. And in the coming year, I hope to continue learning how to be more present, both as a father and as a person. My mother, clearly uncomfortable with this level of emotional honesty, nevertheless made an effort. I'm grateful for family traditions even when they evolve, and I hope that next year brings continued success for everyone. Not perfect, but progress. Alexander spoke of being grateful for his children's happiness, not just their achievements. Natalie expressed gratitude for her expanding definition of fulfillment beyond professional accolades. Thomas thanked everyone for beginning to create a healthier family dynamic. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and looked around at these people who had shaped me in ways both painful and profound. I'm grateful for finding my voice, I said simply, and for those who were willing to listen once I found it. In the coming year, I hope we all continue to grow in our understanding that worth isn't measured by income or titles or prestige, but by authenticity and impact. My mother shifted in her seat but said nothing. My father nodded thoughtfully. Thomas grinned and raised his glass in a subtle toast. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for coffee, my mother approached me somewhat stiffly. "Your community program is doing quite well, I hear." "It is." I agreed, waiting for the qualifier that usually followed any acknowledgement of my success. Instead, she surprised me. "The foundation board has expressed interest in possibly providing some funding. If you'd like to submit a proposal, I could make sure it gets proper consideration." It wasn't an apology for years of dismissal. It wasn't a declaration of pride in my accomplishments, but it was an olive branch offered in the language she knew best, practical support rather than emotional validation. I'd appreciate that, I said, accepting it for what it was. Later, as Michael and I drove home through the snow-covered streets, he asked how I felt about the evening. It was different, I said, considering. Not perfect, but better. Real change takes time. You know what impressed me the most? He asked. You were completely yourself in there. No shrinking, no apologizing, no trying to be someone you're not. I smiled, thinking of that Christmas dinner a year ago when I'd finally spoken my truth. I learned that I don't need to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. My voice matters. My choices matter. And anyone who can't respect that doesn't need to be centered in my life. The journey wasn't over. Family patterns established over decades don't dissolve in a single year. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish, more growth needed on all sides. But the silence had been broken, and in that breaking, something new and healthier had begun to form. I understood now that my mother's cruel words at last year's Christmas dinner, "You're our most useless child," had actually freed me. In standing up to that characterization, I had discovered that my usefulness in this world had nothing to do with Preston's standards of success and everything to do with living with authenticity and purpose. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who made you feel less than for your life choices? How did you find your voice? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories of finding strength in unexpected moments, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your value isn't determined by anyone else's measuring stick. You matter exactly as you are.